for probably quite a while. So I'll get out my jump rope. You guys brought your jump ropes? No? Okay, well, if you would please stand up for just a moment. We'll do a little wake-up exercise. All right, good. All right. If you didn't bring your jump rope, it's okay. I forgot to remind you ahead of time, but let's just do a little jumping, right? All right, good. Don't try to do that with a PA attached, but okay. Lesson learned. All right. All right, thank you all for joining me. It's wonderful to see all of these bright, sunny faces. I'd like to start off with something different. I'd like to open with questions. So please don't be shy. We're going to get some ideas out here. I'd like to know what you're thinking about. Some people posted on the Facebook page before, and I have those questions here, so I'll make sure to address those. But please don't be shy. Raise your hands. I'll list a few things on here, make sure that I touch them either during the presentation or afterwards. So, yes?
Okay, you mentioned fun making games, and I don't really know what the talk's going to be about, but the immediate thing I'm thinking, because I'm in crunch right now, and I'm like, okay, how can you have fun during crunch without succumbing to pressure?
Okay. Fun during crunch. Avoid pressure. Runa.
Could you perhaps introduce yourself first so people know what they can ask you, what your experience is?
Good idea. Who the heck am I? Right. I'm Terrance Cohen. I've worked on a few different things. Most recently, I was the tech lead on game systems for League of Legends. And then I moved on to work on research and development at Riot Games. Before that, I've worked on various different games on console, PC, mobile, stuff like that. So that's a little bit about me. I'm an engineer primarily. I am also passionate about mentoring and advising. My attitude is that I've had some success, but I didn't get here by myself. I have an ability and a responsibility and an obligation to help others succeed. So that's part of the reason that I'm here. So, more questions? Yes, please.
With games that require such delicate balance, do you find that you develop some automation tools to help you with balancing classes and combat in such complicated games?
Okay. Automation for balance. It's a specific question. It sounds like a design it's partially a design, partially an engineering question, right? But I'll come back to that. Yes. Anyone else want to get something? All right, we can get started and come back to this later. Of course, you can't read my handwriting, but that's okay. All right. Let's see if this works. Not working. It's actually okay because I'll just use the arrows. If the arrows would work. Okay. So I think what you do and what we collectively do here is unbelievable, right? I have extreme respect for what you do. You have an incredible passion for games and for creativity, and I have respect for that. So this is an example of what's great about our industry, right? At the end of the day, we're successful if we make things that people like, right? And opportunities to express our creativity, sometimes without concern for what people are going to like, but because we have a drive, we have an emotion that we want to express, right? And what other industry is like this? You know, I was thinking about what other industry has this kind of, you know, drive for creativity and a goal of really serving the clients in a way that just makes them have fun, right? And I thought maybe the candy industry, maybe if you were making candies, you might have a similar experience, but that's about the only one I can think of. And this is not only a great place to be working on games, but this is also an amazing time to be working in the games industry. There's a creativity explosion as the refined genres of the AAA market come in contact with the amazing creativity coming from the indie and the mobile spaces. And these days, the barrier to entry for getting in on developing games, the barrier for expressing creative ideas is gone. And the public appetite for supporting creativity in games seems to be unlimited. The whole space, the developers and the players, has grown and exploded. Right? In the early days, the process of developing games was unrefined, but creativity was unconstrained. So if you had an idea, you could just go and do it. There were very little limitations on what games might be released. There was sort of it was sort of a new landscape for games. And now, in big game development, everything is bigger. Budgets are bigger, team sizes are bigger, timelines are larger. But in the big game development environment, sometimes creativity can suffer. So I'll take an example with a first-person shooter. If you say one day, we're going to make the next big first-person shooter title, your game is about 80 to 95% designed. There's a list of things that you have to do, a set of things that you can't do, and creativity within, outside of that space is somewhat constrained because there are expectations about what a first-person shooter is. And that's true of other genres as well, maybe not to the same extent. At the same time, the indie space has emerged to fill that gap. Okay, so both spaces are here to stay. What's interesting is the interplay, the relationship between the AAA and the indie and mobile spaces, where AAA developers feel empowered to try new things, right? Because if there are new ideas coming out in the indie space, the big developers say, well, we want in on some of that creativity. And where the mobile developers feel empowered to offer deep, engaging experiences that they want to build, right? I mean, the AAA developers are doing great, deep concept games, so why shouldn't indie development get in on that too? So this relationship between the indie and AAA space is really exciting as well. So at a high level, this is what I want to talk about. First, I want to talk about the challenges that organizations face when they're starting out and later as they grow and scale. And then I want to talk about what vision means. We'll discuss why mission and culture are critical to success and a valuable tool at various company sizes. And then we'll hit some thoughts about what to consider during growth, and we'll finish with discussion. So starting out, talking a little bit about the challenges that small organizations can face. So for small organizations, one big challenge is to attract and retain quality talent. Right? When you don't have name recognition, when you don't have a product that people know about, it's hard to convince someone to say, yes, this is what I want to do, and I'm willing to take a risk. Right? Is this going to be a resume builder? Am I going to be able to feed myself? Right? And so what you need to find is people who are willing to sacrifice financial satisfaction. If the game is a big success, great, but you can't depend on that. You want to, and it's hard to find people who are going to say, yes, I'm talented, I'm experienced, I want to do great things, and I'm willing to take the risk that it might not work, right? So the financial incentives are often speculative, and this is a challenge for small organizations. So as an example, to illustrate this point that name recognition can be a challenge for small organizations, I want to do a little demonstration. So, by a show of hands, please, how many of you recognize this logo? Anyone recognize it? Okay. How about this one? Is there any more familiarity with this? This is the logo in context now. Anyone know what this is? Yeah? Okay. Good, good. So you're starting to get a little recognition. By most accounts, this was the first internet browser, NCSA Mosaic. That company became Netscape, or the people who worked on that project when they moved on from, and they broke off from NCSA and started Netscape. I remember when they designed that, they put out a thing on the internet saying, you know, who can design a logo for us? And then that logo became this, and that was the technology that became Mozilla Firefox. And I think this is a good example of the challenge of name recognition. You could have the greatest company doing the biggest thing, but without name recognition, it's hard to attract talent. And when they were just starting out, nobody knew who they were, and who wanted to invest their career in getting involved in that. So a little story about this. The year was 1992. This was the summer after my freshman year of college, and I needed to get a job. So my opportunities were, you know, I went out, looked on campus. I was at University of Illinois or in Urbana-Champaign, and I had a couple of job offers. One was from NCSA. They were working on this thing called Mosaic. They called it an internet browser, but I thought, maybe this is another Gopher thing. Sounds interesting, but I'm not sure. My other opportunity was from the mechanical engineering department at Champaign-Urbana, and they were working on a project called BLAST, Building Loads Analysis and Systems Thermodynamics, and I said, that sounds interesting. That's what I want to do. And I didn't take a chance on NCSA because who were they? So there's sort of a missed opportunity. Another challenge for small organizations is the question of build or buy, right? Often it comes down to your core business. Small organizations should focus on their core business, whether it's game design, whether it's building a game engine, whatever it is you're offering, that should be your core focus, right? And ideally, you're not spending a lot of time on all of the other things. But even then, it's still a question, right? How do you select? Let's say you decide that you want to buy something instead of building it yourself because it's not part of your core business. Well, how do you select the right technology to license or to buy? Right? How do you even have the bandwidth or the right talent to make good decisions about what to build or buy? I'll give you an example. Analytics, right? When you're building a game, very often you want to use an analytics provider so that when you do launch, you know how you're doing and where players are having trouble and where players are really engaged, and ideally where players are going to spend money, because that's how you finance your ongoing development. But there are approximately 1.5 million analytics providers, and how do you pick which one you want to use? Even that can consume a lot of time and resources. So when I was working on this slide, I got this message, and I thought that it was destiny that I should include it in the talk. This is on a message board for founders, entrepreneurs and founders, and this guy's saying, "Hey, help me out. We're evaluating analytics providers, and we're trying to decide, you know, which one should we use, right?" And it reminded me of the spreadsheet I worked on while evaluating analytics providers at my previous company. By the way, before joining Riot Games, I was the vice president of engineering at a company called Augmento, doing location-based and social and augmented reality games for mobile devices. And so I had to answer this question, you know, what analytics provider should we use? And with, you know, I considered 21 different providers, and I was looking at, you know, what are the criteria by which I should distinguish one from another? And so I think this comes down to a question of mission. And we'll talk more about mission and vision in a little bit. But in order to make the best decisions about build or buy, to select the right products and services, you have to compare their strengths against your priorities. And this means you have to have priorities to compare your options against. Right? So for example, one provider might give you more details about monetization, another provider might give you more options for customization, and how do you balance those things? Right? So if your mission is to maximize short-term revenue, then you might prioritize monetization. If your mission is to focus on what players want, then you might prioritize the analytics provider that gives you more customization options. Right? And we'll talk about priorities a little bit more. So the challenges as organizations scale. So as organizations scale, the challenges shift substantially, and the organizations need to shift accordingly. So the problems that tend to arise as organizations scale, get a little bit bigger, is one of the problems is that of alignment. So at Augmento, where I was before Riot Games, we had 9 founders. The good news was that we had a lot of creative visionaries at the company. The bad news was that we had a lot of creative visionaries at the company, and not everyone agreed on what we were trying to do. So we tried a lot of things to see what stuck, and ultimately it was a difficult situation. It was a difficult mission. So I want to ask a question. Who here has heard of Dunbar's number? Anyone familiar with Dunbar's number? Okay. So I just learned about this recently. I think it's interesting. Dunbar's number is a suggested cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships. Right? These are relationships where everybody knows who each person is and how every person fits into the organization. And Dunbar theorized that this limit is a direct function of relative neocortex size, and this in turn limits group sizes. The limit imposed by neocortical processing capacity is simply the number of individuals with whom stable interpersonal relationships can be maintained. So the important point here is that this is a biological limitation. It's not something that you can practice and get better at. I mean, to some extent you can, but there is a limit, and that's a hard limit. Even with the best practices and the hardest work, there's a physiological limit to the number of coworkers that you can relate with on a regular basis. So plan for that, right? And recognize that quality work happens when you can predictably work with a core set of people that you respect and trust. And we'll talk more about respect and trust in a moment. So what does it take to make a product? For example, a game that players actually want to play. Is it talented developers? Sure, you need that, that's for sure. But what else is there? Well, you need marketing. People need to know about your game. They're not going to buy it if they don't know about it, and that takes marketing. Now, these are things that I didn't realize when I was starting out. I thought, well, if I make a great game, then everyone's going to buy it, right? If it's the greatest game, everyone's going to buy it. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot more to it. Another key to success, I think, is everyone working toward a common goal. And we'll talk about that some more. You know, I thought about titling this Formula for Success as a joke, right? Because I don't have the answers, but here are words of advice, and hopefully some stories to illustrate them, and hopefully you can take away some messages. So it might seem like with just a few people in a room, with an organization that's just starting out, people who work together all the time, it's easy to know if everyone's aligned, sharing a common vision, but it's not always the case. So here's a counterexample, a story to illustrate that. This was my introduction to the games industry. I started working in 1997. I started working in games in 97. And my introduction to the games industry, welcome to your new job. We're glad you've safely moved your entire life across the country to Los Angeles. See, the United States is a little too big. It takes 6 hours on a plane to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. Welcome to your new job. We're glad that you've safely moved across the country. The project you were hired for was canceled last week, and you don't have a job. But it's okay, we'll find something for you to do. So I ended up in a group called Cross Production, which was helping to ship new titles. Great. When you work on large projects, you need to have a system for managing all of the assets, art, code, sound. Well, this group was working on many large projects, and their system for managing assets was a little bit too simple. So we had no end of problems, the ones you might expect, like work was lost when 2 people made changes on a certain asset, but they didn't merge their changes. So when the second person committed changes, they erased the changes from the first person that they didn't get before they made their changes, right? Inconsistent versions happen when different people have different combinations of files, and it's not known where the right versions live. Some people have files on their machine, other people have their files on the shared drive, and maybe it doesn't match up. And there's no history of changes, so it's impossible to tell what change caused a problem. You have a bug, and you're like, well, where did this happen? You have no way to track that down. So, the industry has developed tools for solving this problem, but this is an example of lack of alignment. Even if you have a few people working on a small project in a small room, alignment is already a problem. You can imagine as the scale grows, this problem only gets bigger. So we've talked a little bit about the challenges that that presents. Now I want to talk about why I think mission and culture are critical to success to take care of those challenges. And I urge you to think about this as you're getting involved in organizations, as you're growing organizations, or in the organizations you're already part of. So here are interesting questions to ask related to mission and culture. First of all, who do you serve? What characterizes them? Who are the people that you intend to play your game? And I'll give you a hint. If your answer is, I want to deliver to everyone, that's not focused enough. And how do you understand them? What do they like? What do you intend to deliver to them? These are important questions to sort of figure out and tease out the ideas of your mission and your culture, because it has to be aligned with who do you serve and what characterizes them, what's unique about them. So I want to talk a little bit about vision. What is vision? Is it about having a good idea? Well, certainly that's part of it, but there's more to vision. So we're going back, it's 1998, and I'm working at DreamWorks. We're working on the first Medal of Honor for the PlayStation, and the game is shipping in a few months. We're putting the final polishing touches on the game. And Steven Spielberg came to look at how we're doing. Our producer, Peter Hirschman, he's showing off the game. He picks up the controller, he walks down an alley, shoots some Nazis, just what you would expect, right? And then Mr. Spielberg gets up, it's his turn to speak, and he says, "That's great. Now the soldiers are going to behave like this. When a grenade lands near them, the soldier will kick it back, or maybe he'll pick it up and throw it back. If they're in a group, then one soldier will jump on the grenade and everybody else will run." And I'm thinking, crap, how are we going to do this? Right? We're just finishing off this game. We don't have time to be adding all kinds of new AI features. What are we going to do? So Mr. Spielberg leaves, and our producer, Peter Hirschman, turns to us and says, "Yeah, we're not doing any of that." I think that vision is the stick against which ideas are measured. I want to say that again. This is an important point that I think is relevant. I think that vision is not the ideas themselves, it's the stick against which ideas are measured. And being prepared to say that an idea is great and we're not going to do it. Now, we know that things always go as planned, but if you're ever in a situation where things don't quite go as planned, here's a story to think about. This is what we call fan art, right? Sometimes fan art is complimentary and sometimes it's not. This is an example of fan art that's critical of a game. We had some trouble with the AI on SWAT 4. For those who aren't familiar with it, in the single-player campaign, SWAT 4 was a first-person shooter where the player leads a team of SWAT officers into hostile situations. You have 4 AI-controlled officers, and all of the terrorists, hostages, and other characters are AI-controlled. So sometimes the AI would misbehave. When you tell officers to stack up on a door, they want to stand in very specific spots. And they'll tell you if you're in their way. "Sir, you're in my way." And occasionally they'll misfire a grenade and cause a bit of a problem. Here's an example. You'll tell an officer to throw a grenade into a room, and he'll throw it, and it bonks off the door and lands at your feet. You're like, great, what do I do with this? Well, one day during alpha testing, we got a report that AIs were deaf. They couldn't hear you. So if you or another officer walk up behind a terrorist or discharge a weapon near them, they're supposed to hear you and turn around and attack you and react to the sound. But these AIs couldn't hear. And you could walk up right behind them and fire off a weapon, over their shoulder, and they'd be none the wiser. What was the problem? my mouse back. So we thought it was a simple data problem, right? Some listening radius got set too small or something like that. But we couldn't reproduce the problem. It only happened in the remote server farms. So we tried for a while to figure out what the problem was, but we couldn't figure it out. So we sent our AI programmer to the server farm so he could debug it on site. And after a while, he found the problem. So these were headless servers. They were running minimal hardware, basically just a CPU with a hard drive and some memory. And so the way this works is when a sound is played, a callback gets triggered to notify the game that the sound played so that the game can respond, for example, by alerting AIs, hey, this sound played. Well, these callbacks weren't happening on the server. So the AIs wouldn't know that the sound had played. So like, why aren't these callbacks getting called? Well, the answer was that the callbacks didn't happen because the sounds didn't play, and the sounds didn't play because the servers didn't have sound cards. And so the AIs were deaf because the machines didn't have sound cards. So for those who are curious, the fix was simple. We can just notify the AIs directly when playing a sound and not depend on a callback from the audio subsystem. So we said that I believe that vision is the stick against which ideas are measured, and being prepared to say that an idea is great and we're not going to do it. But similarly, I think that vision is being prepared to say that an idea is great and now is just not the right time for it. But maybe one day it'll be the right time. So here's an example. When I was working at Irrational Games, before we made Tribes Vengeance and even before we started SWAT 4, we made a prototype for a game called BioShock, according to the vision of Ken Levine. I thought it was a cool idea. And it was a cool prototype, and Ken shopped it around to publishers for a while, but nobody was interested. You may have heard the story. I think part of the problem was what we talked about earlier, the challenges for small organizations. At the time, Irrational Games was still pretty small, with barely a dozen developers. Nobody knew who we were, so a new, ambitious IP was a tough sell. With an ambitious property, with an ambitious storyline, it was a tough sell. And it didn't matter what we had collectively done. Irrational just didn't have the name or product recognition to let a publisher take a chance on us and invest in a new IP. So I think vision is how we judge ideas. It isn't the ideas themselves. So now I'd like to move on and talk about mission and culture and how they're critical to success and a valuable tool at various company sizes. So this is my word of advice here. Talk about your vision, talk about your culture, and do it constantly. Not once in a while, just all the time. Talk about your vision and your culture. And I'll say that earlier in my career, when I was as an engineer, anytime we talked about our feelings or our ideas or our culture, I said, let me get back, let me do some coding here, I felt like we were wasting time. I felt like we'd be more productive if I spent that time writing code. But what I'm encouraging you to do is actually spend that time, take that time to talk about your mission and your vision and your culture, because it makes a big difference, especially as you're scaling. So mission and culture are pretty abstract notions. I want to bring them home with some concrete examples. To do that, we'll discuss a mission and a culture that I'm familiar with, and that's the one from Riot Games. So I think that Riot is a good example of the principles of mission and culture that I want to illustrate. Certainly not the only one. We'll talk about that too. So this is Steel Legion Lux. This is my favorite skin of my favorite champion in my favorite game. So the mission at Riot Games is we aspire to be the most player-focused game company in the world. That means that from the way that Riot Games formulates teams and sets up patches to the way that they figure out what features or functionality to work on and to prioritize, it's about building the best possible, most enjoyable game experience for the player. Now, this isn't the only mission. I don't want to say it's the right mission. It's Riot's mission, right? Each organization should define their own mission and do so collaboratively. It's not a top-down thing. It's not, the senior executives of the company say this is our mission, this is our culture. It's a conversation. And everyone should buy into it. Now we'll look at a couple of examples of what player focus means. So this is Coca-Cola's Facebook page. It now has over 90 million likes, and it's not controlled by Coke. When the page took off, it's controlled by 2 Coke fans who have a great relationship with Coca-Cola, but there's no contract. They are on their own. They are free to make this page what they want. When the page took off, Coke flew them down to Atlanta and gave them a tour of the facility, reached out to them in a friendly way, right? So there's a relationship there, but there's no contract, and the page is not controlled by Coke. They partner with Coke's interaction design folks to maintain the page, but Coke believes that the brand really belongs to its customers. And this is a great example of customer focus. There's an interesting one I won't go into, but a bunch of fans like this idea of, Lego lets you sort of propose ideas for Legos, and this was a concept for a Lego set based on the League of Legends franchise. This is another player-focused thing. Riot Games conceptually could have conceivably said, we don't want to do this. We want to own it. We want to control it completely. But in many situations, they're cool with that, and that's an example of player focus. So player focus, player first, is really a relationship philosophy. It can be applied to any relationship. Employees, vendors, other departments, and of course players. The idea is to lead the way and be an example of mutual investment. If we invest in our players, then they'll invest in us, and we both win. It's not just Riot, and it's certainly not me saying that culture is central to effectiveness. When I started thinking about this presentation, Fortune magazine said that the best employers in the United States say their greatest tool is culture. So player experience first is an example of a mission, a cultural guiding principle. It's a concrete manifestation of Riot's culture. Certainly it's not the only one. The point is to define or specify your culture, discuss it, plan it, iterate on it, and then live it. This is the Riot Games manifesto. These are the priorities. This is the vision. I won't go into details, but you can look these up online at riotgames.com. And this is a concrete manifestation of Riot's culture. I understand that some of you are in the games industry or considering careers in the games industry, and I encourage everyone to follow your passion wherever that takes you. As you become part of organizations and work with other organizations, think about how you can codify your culture and not just talk about it. The success of mission and culture in your companies is not just coming to talks like this, which is great, and it's not just thinking about them even really hard with other founders. You need to do stuff like this and codify your culture. This is just an example. You might not even think that Riot's culture is that great, but it works well for Riot, and that's a conclusion that they came to collectively for what they want to do at Riot. But I encourage you to do something like this. Now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about thoughts that I think you should consider during those conversations about vision and mission and codifying your culture. So a word of advice, try to make new mistakes. That's not to say don't make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, and that's part of the process. That's an important part of the process. But try to make new mistakes, right? I've kept a top 10. Well, it was supposed to be a top 10, and then it grew a little bit bigger. But a top list of problems that come up in every game. So some of you have worked on games before. Let me know if you've heard of these before. Number 1, where is this asset referenced? Okay, very often you get towards the end of a project and you've got a bunch of assets and you're like, well, we need to ship all of this, and that's like 15 gigs, and you're like, well, whatever, we need to trim this down. Are all of these used? I don't know. And Unreal has tools to help with that now. They didn't. It was a little more complicated a little farther back. Number 2, it works in single player. It works on my machine, right? Ever seen it? Raise your hand if you've seen that before. Yeah? Okay. Number 3, looping effects don't stop. Particles or sounds keep going when they aren't supposed to, right? All right. Number 4, this is, don't raise your hand, just use UTC, okay? Don't try to come up with what time zone should you be working in or so that client and server agree. Just use UTC, it's simpler that way. Okay, who's seen this one, number 5? Asserts are in debug, so they're ignored, right? Problems come up, nobody sees them because they get spit out to an error log or they're turned off in debug, so nobody knows they're happening. All right? There's a problem, nobody's paying attention. That's number 6 also, is logging errors. Great. Number 7, if you've used web applications, web backends for games, a missing database index causes bad performance drop. Have you ever seen that before? Number 8, debug configuration is neglected and broken. Anyone? Okay. Number 9, budgets? What budgets? Number 10, random pick isn't random or even. So when you're developing a game, people will be playing it 1,000 times over and over, and they say, you know, if something is supposed to be random and it happens the same 4 times in a row, it must not be random. But when you're playing it that often, and you get something that happens the same 4 times in a row, it's still random. Okay. Number 11, hard-coded, unlocalized text. Right? Text presented to the user should be localized. You should prepare for that because one day you're going to want to ship your game in another language, and you need to take advantage of the localization tools. Number 12, invisible actors because they spawned underground. And number 13, which doesn't happen as often anymore, inside-out volumes. So when you walk out of the volume, you get the walked-in volume triggered because you actually walked out of the volume because the volume's inside out. Okay. So this is a piece of advice that I learned from Mike Acton, who's the engine director at Insomniac Games. He always says, where there's one, there's many. How am I doing on time here? I'm going over a little bit. Is that okay? Okay. Where there's one, there's many. He says, when have you ever needed to update one particle? Or transform a single vertex, or clip a single polygon? Does that ever happen? You usually are working on those in batches. So I think the same concept applies to large categories of work in games. So the idea is never try to solve a problem like it's the only time or the last time you'll see it. Always solve it like there are many more just like it on the way. Okay? Now it's tempting to think that this means to solve everything in the most generic way. And I would say no, I caution you against that. Then you risk solving the problem for the lowest common denominator. Just don't pretend that you're solving a problem for the last time. Think about solving it for this time and for the next time. The next piece of advice is that you should give and receive feedback as a gift. And I mean seriously, everyone has to buy into this. When feedback is delivered and received as a gift, it's a powerful tool that helps everyone work more efficiently and more effectively and more happily. It's amazing what this does to an organization when everyone agrees that to treat feedback as a gift. Right? Thinking of feedback, giving feedback is a brave act. You walk up to someone that you're working with every day and you say, you know what, I think you made a mistake here. And they say to you, thank you, because it makes them better and it makes collectively the organization is more successful that way. So think of feedback as a gift. And also default to trust. Trust should not need to be earned. When you meet someone for the first time, when they've made a decision that you don't understand, assume that they know what they're doing. However, you can't use trust as a shield. It doesn't go the other way. You can't say to someone, well, don't criticize me, just trust me. When trust is given freely but not expected, it's a powerful tool. And the reason that trust is a valuable tool is because talented people do their best work when they feel trusted and supported. And the key to that is dedicated mentorship. So like I said earlier on, I've had success in my career, but I didn't get here on my own. I have an ability and a responsibility and an obligation to help others. That's part of the reason that I'm here. In February of 2008, open source was not really part of the games industry. If you can imagine, game development vocabulary didn't include open sourcing anything, because everything was generally considered part of a company's competitive advantage. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the things that we do every day are not part of our competitive advantage. It's not something that differentiates our title from another title. So at GDC, first in a closed press conference and later at a GDC presentation, Insomniac Games announced the Nocturnal Initiative. It was an open source toolbox for the professional game developer. It was written by various programmers at Insomniac Games, including only a small contribution from myself. But the initiative was not my idea, and I had little to do with it. But the reasons that we did it have shaped some of my beliefs about how to be an impactful game developer and a good citizen in the developer world. So OneUp.com said, earlier today at GDC, Insomniac Games announced the Nocturnal Initiative. According to the Nocturnal Initiative website, where anyone can download the tools that Insomniac has currently made available, the goal of this initiative is to get developers to share useful foundation code and techniques across company boundaries, allowing developers to make better games with less time. What we said was the ultimate goal for the Nocturnal Initiative is to give people more time to make creative games instead of working on issues that we have to do over and over again and that are a waste of time. All developers, including Insomniac, will hopefully contribute their own code, then continually improve on that code for the benefit of the entire development community. The easier we make it to make games, the more games there are out there, and the more platforms get sold, and the more competition there is out there. And competition for us is awesome. Around that time, I had some conversations with Mike Acton, who was and still is the engine director at Insomniac. I wanted to really understand the motivation behind the Nocturnal Initiative. Today, open source is pretty common in the games industry. Keep in mind that at that time, about 7 years ago, it was a pretty new idea worthy of a presentation and a press conference. So Mike explained these themes. He said, the rising tide raises all ships, right? The idea that we all succeed together. And that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, we're not starting from scratch. We're doing things that build on work that has come before. And we have an obligation to give back. There's also the idea, let them help us, right? So we're not so conceited to think that we have ownership of all of the great ideas in the world. Let people help us and work together with us. Great. And I want to talk a little bit about the big stick ideology. The United States President Theodore Roosevelt, early last century, often said, he said, speak softly and carry a big stick. So this was his approach to foreign policy, and he described his style as the exercise of intelligent forethought and decisive action sufficiently far in advance of any likely crisis. So I like his philosophy for game development, the idea of exercising intelligent forethought and coming prepared with many options for whatever you might discover along the way. You can't know ahead of time what you'll run into. Be prepared. Right, and I'm talking about engineering and development tools. And I like to talk about it as the toolbox metaphor. Right? And I think about it like this. Understand your problem deeply, carry a big toolbox, and know how to use it. Only then can you hope to tackle the big problems and apply the right tools to the right problems. And this is the concept of keep it simple, keep it stupid. Keep it stupid, keep it simple. And it's been said through history in different ways. Leonardo da Vinci said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Albert Einstein said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. The one that I like the best is from Saint-Exupéry, who wrote The Little Prince. And he said, in anything at all, perfection is finally achieved not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. I think it's profound. Well, we've covered a lot. We talked about the challenges that organizations face when they're starting out and later as they grow and scale. And we talked about what vision means. We discussed why mission and culture are critical to success and a valuable tool at various company sizes. And then we hit some thoughts about what to consider during growth. And now we're going to finish with some discussion. And I want to thank you very much for your attention. So please don't be shy. I love hearing stories and helping however I can, so please speak up. So these are questions that were posted on the Facebook page, and I've copied them down here. By the way, the reason that I started with questions and the reason that I put these questions on the parking lot, this is sort of an example of player focus, right? In a way, you guys are my customers here, right? And I'm here to serve you. And so I wanted to start out and focus from the outset on what's important to you. That's what I'm here for. So the first question that came from Marianne, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, she said that I've heard a lot of game students ask, how should I develop my talents? Should I learn a bit about everything or focus on specializing in a specific role? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Small indies seem to do everything themselves, while big AAA studios hire lighting masters or UI designers, so I understand the uncertainty. So the way I would address that is, I hope it's fulfilling, but the way I would answer that is just follow your passion, right? That's where you will succeed. People tend to succeed in the thing that they love doing, right? And hopefully, I hope for all of you that you will end up in a position where you're doing the thing that you'd be doing if you didn't need to get paid for it, right? That's sort of the ultimate satisfaction, is if you can do what you would do anyway. If you love writing graphics shaders, then that's what you should do, right? And if you love balancing economies in gameplay, then do that. I personally love building gameplay systems that unlock the creativity of other developers. So I tend to be a generalist because that's what excites me. So follow your passion. If you don't know what excites you, try everything and see how it makes you feel. Pick the stuff you love and do those things again, because that's where you'll succeed the most. I'm going to not try to pronounce this name. I hope you'll understand. In which ways is working at a big studio in the North America different from working in a smaller indie company? So I think in big companies, people tend to go deep. In small companies, people tend to go broad. What I mean is that in big companies, people tend to specialize in a particular area and develop deep expertise in that particular area. But often they don't know much about other areas and having trouble coming up with solutions that play nicely with other systems. In indie development, people tend to develop talents in many different areas. They may not develop each skill very much, but they tend to have a better ability to see the big picture and to find opportunities to advance a project. What are good workflows people should have when working in large groups? I'll just address this briefly. I'll say that use tools, find tools that help you. Have people on your team who are dedicated to process. And when you're talking about a large group, there should be people who their area of expertise is process, is working with groups and keeping people aligned and keeping people involved in mission. And then also be involved in mentoring. Nobody knows everything. Everybody can learn from almost anybody else. And so take advantage of mentoring opportunities. What are common misconceptions people have when it comes to working in larger companies? I can't answer this very well. Maybe somebody can tell me what are the conceptions people have about working in big companies. So I'm not sure. All right. I'll come to these later, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to speak some more. So in the parking lot, we have a couple of questions. Fun during crunch, avoiding pressure. Did everyone get a jump rope? Right. No, really, I mean, don't take it too seriously. We're supposed to be having fun, and if you're not having fun, you're probably working at a company that is valuing the wrong things. And you should bring that up. This goes back to the point of feedback. You should be able to come to someone and say, look, I think we're doing this wrong. The point here is that our customers are having fun, and if we're not having fun, then how can we expect them to? You know, at Riot Games, we think of ourselves as the players who happen to also work on the game. And we need to think about it that way, because how can we make good decisions about what players will want and enjoy if we ourselves aren't participating in that activity, right? So, you know, fun during crunch and avoiding pressure. I mean, play. I walked around a lot and I saw people playing games, and I think that's great. You know, browse Facebook. But it's important to understand that in order to deliver the experiences that players expect of us, we need to be able to have fun with it as well. Automation for balance. This is largely a design question. I don't profess to be a designer. I think of myself as the guy who makes it work. And you know, people from the outside of the games industry say to me, "Hey, so you're a game programmer. What is that?" And I say, I usually try to describe it really simply. I say, artists make it pretty, animators make it move, designers make it fun, and I make it work. Okay. So this is a design question, and I don't profess to have a talent in design. I would say to a designer, hey, what can I do for you that makes your job better, right? Your job is to make it fun, right? I don't know how to really make it fun. I can tweak a few things here and there, but what can I do to open up your creativity, to allow you to express your creativity in the game without barriers in terms of technology or workflow? What can I do to make that easier? So this is a question of automation for balance. And you know, if this is a tool that designers say, this is what's going to make my life better and allow me to express my creativity in the game, then that's what we should be building. And some places have that and some places don't. It makes sense for some genres and not for others, and for some games and not others. So please, I want to open it up. Don't be shy. Ask me some questions.
Who inspires you? Who do you look up to?
Yeah. I have some mentors of my own in the games industry. I think I was really lucky to have some good mentors. I don't know if they're the ones who inspire me the most, but they do make me think. There was a period when I was working not in the games industry. I worked in speech recognition. We were working on LVCSR, large vocabulary continuous speech recognition for handheld devices. Think of Siri when Palm Pilot was state of the art. Okay, and there I was working for David Abrahams, who he wrote the exception safety specification for the C++ standard. So he was hardcore patterns and template meta programming and very, very high level engineering. And I learned from him that you know, thinking about how the machine is actually processing your code doesn't matter. Don't think about that. And then my next mentor was Mike Acton at Insomniac Games, and he said, your code is running on real hardware, and never forget that, right? He said, all that high-level stuff, you know, he'd rather throw out the compiler altogether and just write everything in assembly. And he said, forget about all that fancy, you know, compiler stuff. Just write the code because it's running on real hardware, and that's the only way you're going to really write great stuff. And so these are completely diametrically opposed viewpoints. And so I kind of imagine, you know, the good angel and the bad angel sitting on my shoulder anytime I'm writing something, and they're arguing with each other. No, write it very high level, and the other one's like, no, write it very low level. And so that's the challenge, is to balance architecture with performance considerations in the design of large software systems. So that's what I think about. That's what inspires me. Anyone else? Yes, please.
I don't know if you can answer this, but what does a AAA portfolio look like?
What does a AAA portfolio look like? I'm going to see if I can interpret that. You know, I'd say before 2006, 2007, companies went broad, right? They would try large companies. I won't name names, but there were a few large companies, and they would try everything. They would throw everything at the wall and see what stuck. So they might invest in 5 different games in each genre, and the ones that succeeded would pay for the ones that failed. And that model doesn't work anymore. Now companies are a lot more cautious, and they will do their homework, right? They'll decide. They'll vet ideas much more before they put them into production, and once they're in production, they'll vet them even more and say, you know what, this doesn't look like a success. We're going to cut our losses and we're going to cancel the project, for better or for worse, right? The good news is that there are more of the games that come out are better. It used to be that there would be a lot of really not inspired work coming out, and people wouldn't hear about them, and people wouldn't buy them, and they weren't very good, and people didn't talk about them much, and the ones that did succeed would pay for the rest. So I think, in answer to your question, a AAA portfolio has changed, right? And a AAA portfolio doesn't mean have a bunch of games in every genre. Now it means, hopefully, maybe I'm just imposing my own wishes, my own hopes for the industry, but I think now a AAA portfolio means a set of really, really awesome games, hopefully. What else? All right. Yes, please.
Do you see the industry getting out of the winner-takes-all state it's in now back into more of a diverse spread success?
I mean, it's an interesting idea, right? I'm trying to think of the companies that have started with a small idea or a